It started like any other busy morning at JFK Airport. The terminals were buzzing. Flight announcements echoed overhead. People rushed to catch their planes, dragging luggage behind them, grabbing last-minute coffee, hugging loved ones goodbye. But no one knew that something unforgettable was about to happen at Gate 42. No one expected what would unfold at Gate 42. A moment so shocking, so unbelievable, it would go viral within hours and leave a permanent mark on airline policy. A well-dressed black man in his mid-40s, confident, composed, and carrying a leather briefcase, approached the gate to board his international flight. With a calm smile, he greeted the gate agent politely and handed over his passport. What should have been a standard check-in suddenly turned tense. The gate agent glanced at the passport, narrowed her eyes, then looked the man up and down in silent judgment. Without even scanning it, without asking a single question, she rolled her eyes, leaned over to a colleague, whispered something under her breath, and then, shockingly, ripped the passport in half right in front of him. Gasps erupted. A couple walking by froze mid-step. A woman in line dropped her coffee, and passengers turned their heads, unsure if what they'd just witnessed was real. "Your passport's fake," the gate agent said coldly, snapping her fingers and motioning toward security. "Step aside. You're not getting on this flight." The man blinked, not in panic, but in measured disbelief. "Excuse me?" he asked, calm and steady. She sneered, louder this time so the crowd could hear. "You heard me. You people try this all the time." And with those words, "you people," the tension exploded from unsettling to outrageous. The insult wasn't just personal. It was systemic, targeted, and toxic. But the man didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply reached inside his briefcase and pulled out a slim, black leather folder, the kind used only by federal agents. He flipped it open and showed her a badge. Not just any badge, the official seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. The onlookers leaned in. The gate agent's face turned pale. Her smirk disappeared instantly. "My name is Charles Daniels," he said firmly. "I'm a senior inspector for the FAA. What you just did wasn't only disrespectful, it was illegal. You've destroyed government property and violated federal regulations." The terminal, once noisy with chatter, fell into absolute silence. The crowd was frozen. The supervisor arrived in a panic, stumbling through apologies. But it was too late. The damage was done. Charles Daniels wasn't just any traveler. He was sent by the FAA undercover after multiple reports of discrimination at this exact gate. The passport was real. The boarding pass? Part of the investigation. And now, the agent had done exactly what she was being watched for: discriminated, profiled, and abused authority without reason. Security personnel arrived, but shifted their stance as soon as the badge was shown. Now, they weren't there to detain Charles. They were there to investigate what had just occurred. Charles calmly filed a report on the spot. Passengers began recording, and within minutes, videos hit the internet. One TikTok alone reached 1 million views before the afternoon. "Gate agent rips up FAA inspector's passport" became the headline across social media and later, major news outlets. The public demanded action. Comment sections exploded with anger and support. "She judged him by his skin before she even checked the document," one user wrote. "He handled it like a true professional," another added. By evening, the airline issued a public statement saying the gate agent had been placed on immediate leave pending investigation. But behind the scenes, the FAA was moving faster. Interviews were conducted, footage reviewed, passengers gave statements. It turned out the gate agent had a long list of prior complaints, allegations of rude behavior, targeting travelers of color, and dismissing customers without proper reason. But this time, she hadn't just mistreated a traveler. She had exposed herself to the very agency monitoring her. Within days, she was permanently terminated, and the FAA used the incident to launch a full review of the airline's gate staff policies nationwide. Meanwhile, Charles Daniels became a quiet symbol of grace under pressure. He declined most interviews but released a short statement that went viral. This wasn't about going viral. It was about showing what happens when power is used to discriminate. I did my job, and I stayed calm, not for me, but for every passenger who never got a second chance to prove they were telling the truth. He was praised for his composure, his courage, and most of all, for exposing the kind of behavior that often goes unchecked in everyday spaces. His story became a lesson on how racism can wear a uniform and hold authority, and how sometimes justice shows up wearing one too. And for the rest of us, this story is a reminder that you never know who someone is. You never know who's watching, who's listening, or who's testing the system. That gate agent thought she had all the power until she realized she had just ripped up the passport of the very man sent to judge her actions. In one moment of bias, she didn't just cost a traveler a flight. She cost herself her career. And Charles Daniels? He didn't just expose her. He exposed a problem far bigger than one person and gave people the courage to say enough. So the next time someone tells you that calm doesn't change the world, show them this story. The man stood silently for a moment, not saying a word, not raising his voice, not reacting the way most people would if their passport had just been ripped in half. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He didn't argue. Instead, he took a quiet breath, adjusted his stance, and reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket with measured calm. Passengers nearby watched curiously, some with wide eyes, unsure of what he was about to do. What he pulled out was not a new passport, not a phone to call for help. It was a sleek black leather folder. He opened it carefully, almost ceremonially, revealing a gold badge with the unmistakable seal of the United States Federal Aviation Administration. The silence around him turned even heavier as he held it up, steady and confident, locking eyes with the now-shocked gate agent. "I'm Charles Daniels," he said, his voice firm and unshakable. "FAA, Senior Inspector. You just destroyed federal property." The gate agent's smug smile melted instantly. Her face drained of color. It was as if someone had pulled the floor out from under her. The sense of power she had just moments earlier gone. Completely gone. Just then, the terminal supervisor arrived, walking toward the scene, probably expecting a routine customer issue. But when he saw the badge, the torn passport, and the tension in the air, he stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't need an explanation. The situation spoke for itself. Around them, travelers were frozen in place. A few passengers had already pulled out their phones and hit record. Some whispered to each other, others just stared. What they were witnessing wasn't just an incident. It was an exposure, a moment of truth. Charles Daniels was not an ordinary traveler. In fact, he wasn't traveling at all. His boarding pass was never real. The flight wasn't his. He had been sent there for a reason, on a mission by the FAA. After a series of complaints had been filed about racial profiling, verbal abuse, and misconduct specifically at this gate, the agency launched an undercover investigation. Charles, a respected inspector with years of experience, was chosen to go in as a mystery passenger to see if the reports were true. And now, in front of everyone, the gate agent had done exactly what so many passengers had described in anonymous reports: judged someone by the color of their skin, dismissed their credentials, and acted with arrogance and discrimination. She didn't even scan the passport. She didn't ask any questions. She made a judgment based on appearance and tore up a document that didn't belong to her, one that legally represented a U.S. citizen. But this time, she didn't just treat a passenger unfairly. She destroyed property belonging to a federal investigator. And worse, she did it in full view of dozens of witnesses. For Charles, this wasn't about revenge or confrontation. It was about truth, professionalism, and justice. He didn't need to raise his voice to prove anything. His badge said everything. And in that moment, the power dynamic flipped. The woman who had tried to humiliate him was now standing speechless in front of the very man sent to evaluate her behavior. Word spread fast around the gate area. Employees began whispering. Managers rushed to gather details. Security appeared, but quickly realized who Charles was and who they should really be listening to. Charles didn't make a scene. He simply requested an incident report be filed, documented the names of those involved, and asked that the footage from the security cameras be preserved. Meanwhile, The videos recorded by nearby passengers had already begun making their way onto social media platforms. Within the hour, hashtags like hashtag #FAInspector and hashtag Gate42 were trending. By that evening, millions had viewed the footage. The gate agent's actions were condemned across the internet, with people shocked at how casually she had dismissed someone so respectful, so professional. The fact that he turned out to be a federal inspector only added fuel to the fire. What made the story even more powerful wasn't just the drama. It was how calmly Charles handled the entire situation. No yelling, no anger, just truth. Quiet, firm, and undeniable truth. And as for the gate agent, she had no excuses. No explanation could justify what she did. She hadn't just misjudged a man. She had exposed a deep flaw in how she used her position. She had failed not just as an employee, but as a representative of a company trusted to serve all people equally. In a single moment, she lost more than her temper. She lost her credibility, her career, and the benefit of the doubt. And Charles Daniels? He didn't just uncover discrimination. He exposed it to the world, not with rage, but with reason. And that's what made this story unforgettable. Security was called, but not for Charles. For once, the black man at the center of the incident wasn't treated as the problem. Instead, he was the authority. As the confused security team approached, they were immediately briefed on who Charles Daniels really was. A senior inspector from the Federal Aviation Administration, undercover on a mission to investigate racial profiling and staff misconduct. And it wasn't long before the situation escalated up the chain. The airline's regional manager was on the phone within minutes, alerted to the fact that a federal agent had just had his passport torn in half by one of their own employees. The supervisor on site looked visibly panicked, fumbling through his words as he tried to explain the situation, what had happened, why it happened, and how things got this far. But every explanation sounded worse than the last. There was no justification, no excuse that could make sense of what dozens of witnesses had just seen. Passengers stood around in disbelief, murmuring to one another, stunned that something like this had actually happened in broad daylight at one of the busiest airports in America. One elderly man leaned toward his wife and whispered what everyone was thinking, but no one had said aloud yet. That agent just got herself fired. There was no escaping the gravity of what she had done. Meanwhile, Charles remained completely composed. He wasn't there to argue or make a scene. He was there to do his job. And that's exactly what he did. With the same calm professionalism he had shown from the moment the passport was ripped, he requested to speak directly with airport operations. He provided his credentials again, detailed the incident clearly, and filed an official misconduct report on the spot. The seriousness of the situation meant everything had to be handled by the book. The gate area was temporarily shut down, with all passengers redirected to nearby waiting areas. Every airline employee who had interacted with Charles during the incident, gate agents, supervisors, even the ones who had only stood by silently, were asked to step aside and wait for questioning. This was no longer a customer service complaint. This was now a federal investigation. But Charles wasn't finished yet. Turning to the passengers who had witnessed the entire ordeal, some still shaken, others still holding their phones mid-record, he raised his voice just enough to be heard clearly. "This," he said, gesturing to the torn passport and the silent, shocked gate staff, "is exactly what we investigate. Racial profiling, abuse of authority, and discrimination. And if anyone else here has experienced anything similar, now is the time to speak up." His words hit hard, powerful, calm, undeniable. There was a brief pause, a moment of hesitation in the air, and then one woman stepped forward. Then a man, then another. In total, 5 passengers came forward, each with their own story about being mistreated, ignored, or spoken down to at the same gate by this same staff. Their courage, inspired by Charles's stance, helped uncover a pattern. What had seemed like one shocking moment was now part of a much bigger picture, a pattern of misconduct that had gone unchecked until now. And as the stories were being taken down, something else was happening just as fast and just as powerful. The videos that passengers had recorded, some from just a few feet away, were already circulating online. TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, they lit up with clips of the gate agent ripping the passport, Charles calmly revealing his badge, and the moment the room fell silent. One clip alone had already reached 2 million views in just 3 hours, with comments flooding in by the thousands every minute. People around the country were outraged, inspired, and glued to their screens. "He handled that like a boss," one user posted. "How many times has this happened without anyone to hold them accountable?" asked another. The moment had become a symbol, not just of one man standing up for what's right, but of how professionalism and truth can defeat prejudice in the most powerful way. Charles Daniels didn't need to yell. He didn't need to fight. He simply stood tall, spoke truth, and gave others the courage to do the same. What began as a single act of discrimination had now become national news, triggering an internal investigation, online outrage, and a clear message to corporations across the country. You never know who you're speaking to, and your actions always matter. Charles Daniels had walked into Gate 42 quietly, without fanfare, without warning, but by the time he left, he had changed something far bigger than a boarding gate. He had exposed a truth, lifted other voices, and held the system accountable, not with anger, but with integrity. And the world was watching. By the next morning, the story had taken over every major social media platform and news outlet. The headline was everywhere. Gate agent rips up FAA inspector's passport. It wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It had gone global. On TikTok, the video had racked up millions of views overnight. On Twitter, influencers and celebrities were weighing in, retweeting the footage with messages like, "This is why representation matters," and "He handled this with dignity," and the world noticed. On Facebook, people were sharing the clip along with personal stories of their own travel experiences, some heartbreakingly similar. Civil rights groups immediately issued statements condemning the gate agent's actions and demanding accountability, not just from the airline involved, but from the entire airline industry. Hashtags like hashtag Gate42, hashtag Justice for Charles, and hashtag Flying While Black were trending within hours. Cable news anchors debated it in primetime slots. Morning talk shows played the footage on loop. The message was clear. This was bigger than one employee or one incident. It had tapped into something deeper, an ongoing issue of racial bias in spaces where professionalism and equality are supposed to be standard. The airline responded quickly, releasing a formal statement that circulated through press releases, social media posts, and major news websites. They confirmed the incident, stated that the gate agent had been suspended indefinitely pending a full investigation, and expressed their commitment to addressing the matter seriously. They promised to implement stronger anti-discrimination training for all staff, conduct a full internal review of gate operations, and revise protocols for handling passenger interactions. But while the airline was talking about suspension and policy changes, the FAA had already moved to a different gear entirely. They weren't just issuing statements. They were launching a formal investigation. Because for them, this wasn't just a bad customer service moment. This was a federal matter involving misconduct, racial profiling, and the destruction of government-issued documentation by an airline employee. Charles Daniels had done his job exactly as instructed. He had gone undercover to observe the environment and assess the legitimacy of the complaints the FAA had received. What he uncovered and experienced firsthand was worse than anticipated. And how he handled it, that's what made the story even more powerful. In a world where tempers often flare and shouting matches go viral, Charles didn't need to yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't act out of anger. He simply showed up, observed, documented, and when the moment came, revealed the truth with poise and professionalism. The public noticed. In countless interviews, news anchors and legal experts praised his calm demeanor. Civil rights attorneys called him the definition of grace under pressure. He gave one short interview on national television where he sat in a simple chair in front of a simple background and said just a few powerful words, "I didn't do this for attention. I did it because no one should be judged by their skin color, especially in a place that's supposed to serve the public equally." That one sentence echoed through headlines. People clipped it, quoted it, and shared it like a rallying cry. In an age full of viral noise, those words cut through clearly. They reminded the world that justice doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it wears a suit and carries a badge. And sometimes it stays quiet until it has no choice but to speak. As for the gate agent, the fallout was swift. Following the FAA's findings, she was officially terminated from her position. But what shocked people most was what the investigation revealed. This incident wasn't an isolated mistake. FAA records and witness reports confirmed that she had a documented pattern of complaints. Passengers claiming she had used harsh language, exercised poor judgment, and targeted people based on their appearance. Several of those complaints had gone unresolved, buried in paperwork, or passed off as misunderstandings. But not this time. This time, her actions have been caught in real time, witnessed by dozens, recorded from multiple angles, and shown to the world. The system that once overlooked her behavior was now the same system holding her accountable. And in the process, a spotlight was cast on a much bigger issue. People began questioning how many other Charles Daniels have been mistreated without anyone ever knowing. How many travelers have been dismissed, humiliated, or turned away just because someone in uniform didn't see them as worthy of respect? And how many of those stories never went viral because they didn't have a badge or a title to protect them? That's what made this story matter. Not just the shocking act of a passport being torn in half, but what it represented. The clash between prejudice and professionalism, between arrogance and accountability. Charles Daniels didn't just protect passengers. He became a voice for the voiceless. A quiet hero who proved that justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it stands silently, then speaks the truth at the right moment. And when it does, the whole world listens. This story wasn't just about a torn passport. It was about something far deeper: respect, accountability, and the undeniable strength of staying calm in the face of injustice. It wasn't just about a federal inspector doing his job. It was about how easily someone could be misjudged, mistreated, and dismissed based solely on how they look. Charles Daniels, a senior FAA inspector, didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't yell. He didn't get angry. He didn't fight fire with fire. Instead, he stayed composed, steady, and calm. Because he understood something most people miss. Real power doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, the most powerful response is quiet and firm truth. When that gate agent ripped up his passport, she didn't just destroy a document. She destroyed her own credibility. She didn't realize she had insulted and dismissed the very man sent to evaluate her performance. She assumed she had control, authority, and the final word. But in reality, she had just made a critical mistake in front of a federal officer, in front of passengers, in front of cameras, and in front of the world. In that moment, her bias got the best of her. And in that same moment, Charles Daniels' restraint revealed the best of him. In a world where people are often quick to react, where assumptions turn into accusations, where tempers flare before facts are known, this story reminds us why patience and poise matter. It's easy to let anger take over when someone wrongs you, especially when it's rooted in prejudice. But Charles proved that justice doesn't need rage to be effective. His badge spoke louder than any argument ever could. His calm demeanor sent a stronger message than a viral rant. And his courage under pressure inspired millions. The lesson here is simple but powerful. We never really know who we're speaking to. The person we dismiss might be someone with the authority to hold us accountable. The individual we judge might be the one evaluating our behavior. That gate agent thought she held all the power because she wore the uniform, because she was behind the desk, because she could control who passed and who didn't. But she didn't know that the man in front of her wasn't just any traveler. He was the one person she should have treated with utmost professionalism, the very inspector investigating complaints like hers. Her mistake didn't just cost her a moment, it cost her everything. Her job, her reputation, her chance to do better. And that's the risk of letting prejudice take the lead. When we judge someone unfairly, when we act on assumptions rather than facts, we don't just hurt others, we sabotage ourselves. And for the rest of us watching this unfold, there's a takeaway we shouldn't ignore. Treat everyone with dignity, because it costs nothing, but failing to do so can cost you everything. Charles Daniels didn't just expose a flawed system. He set an example for how to respond when that system fails us. He reminded the world that professionalism still matters, that character still counts, that how we respond under pressure defines us far more than the pressure itself. His story isn't just about an inspector and a gate agent. It's about every single one of us, about how we treat people, about how we hold ourselves accountable, about whether we choose to lead with judgment or with respect. In the end, this wasn't just about a ripped passport. It was about a broken mindset, and the man who calmly stood up to it, not by shouting, but by standing tall, speaking truth, and letting justice speak for itself. If this story shocked you, inspired you, or opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful real-life stories that need to be heard. Microphone, drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Charles's shoes? This is Mindflix Stories, where truth meets drama.